Hi everyone, today I've got the absolutely radiant and amazing Katinka Soetens with me. Katinka, please could you introduce yourself and share how you were drawn to Avalon?
Thank you, Ria. It's a pleasure to be here and to have you ask me these questions. My name is Katinka Soetens and I'm originally from the Netherlands, but I moved to Cornwall, which became my heart's land, or one of my heart's land, when I was 19, at the point in my life when my mother had just died after a long illness. And so for me, there is a journey with Goddess that's related to that journey of myself as the young explorer archetype who left her country and found her heartland in relation to nature, the beautiful landscape of Cornwall. I was already on a pagan path, because if you are having an encounter with death quite early in your life, close to you, this brings up, it makes you question the foundations of your life, the things you believe or that are important to you. And so the gift of that journey really has been a development of my spirituality, of my connection to my body as sacred, connection to the moon cycles, with my female cycles. That came quite early on, plus a very healthy upbringing where a liberal Christian background, but where questioning was encouraged. Very, very fortunate to have had teachers in my life that encouraged questioning of the young mind rather than taking the dogma as given, and finding your own way into what is true for you and what is a reality that makes sense from both a spiritual and philosophical and a humanitarian, very important for me, point of view. And so this carried sort of along with me and developed in Cornwall in particular from a more nature-based spirituality and a pagan path, where I was calling myself a witch quite early on, from about 15 or something, and interest in Wicca, to this development of Goddess, which was really what has eventually then brought me to Glastonbury, Avalon as well. I had this, what you could call a spiritual awakening, while I was giving birth to my first child, my eldest daughter. And after that, I knew I had to find specific goddess-orientated groups or guidance or resonance, and found the Goddess Conference actually, and came as a participant for several years. So that was what initially, absolutely, she brought me here. Really, it was not like come to Avalon or something dramatic like that. It was just like something I knew I had to find, and that is what I found. So I see that as the red thread really of my development as a human, but also my spiritual development over the years.
How do you experience and express your spiritual path in Avalon day to day?
So as a priestess here on the sacred land, I'm first really a priestess to the goddess in many different forms, and I feel resonance particularly with lots of European goddesses, also goddesses more global, but I very much feel a daughter of Europa. And so here in this specific place where I happen to live, I am a priestess of Avalon, but I am first a priestess of Rhiannon and a priestess to the horned god as well, because for me, sacred union of the divine forms that could be seen as female and male, or feminine and masculine, or goddess and god, is really, really important. So in my day-to-day, this includes really connecting to the deities of place, to the elemental beings, to the spirits of the land, in simple things like lighting a candle on the altar, or I should really be doing daily practice, but if I'm completely honest with you all, I don't do it every day. But so through practices, it is important to do practices. Service to others, so holding open the Temple of Avalon and creating that sacred space, the pagan temple to the goddesses and gods of Avalon here, together with sister priestesses. Serving the Goddess Conference together with my wonderful sister priestess Marion van Eupen. We are the co-creators of the Goddess Conference in Glastonbury every year. And then through teaching, the teachings of Rhiannon in workshops, in online courses, and in the Priestess of Rhiannon training. And that really reminds me to drop in deeper and deeper to the teachings of her Wheel of Initiations, which is so rich and so layered. Corresponds to the labyrinth priestess of Avalon, the labyrinth here in the landscape on the tour. So there is a correlation with the land, the deity of place, but also just how your own life is corresponding to the Great Wheel, and how these initiations of the rites of passages of the different stages of life deepen you into your connection. So that is an everyday connecting to whatever is going on. And I'm a human being, and I'm certainly not perfect. I'm on the journey like everybody else. And so I very often forget to make those connections, those correlations, and to really live that path of love that I am absolutely dedicated to. So, there are reminders, both if things are going well and if things are not going well, of what it means to be a priestess of the goddess in this place. Priestess of Rhiannon, a priestess of Avalon, here in this day and in this time, in this life, in the everyday, not just in a ceremony or in an event. And so it's very much about living that truth for myself, to teach what I preach only if I can walk what I talk. That is, I think, my most baseline daily connection.
When we say goddess or divine feminine, I feel like everyone's perspective of her is like a fingerprint. It's so unique to them. So what does goddess or divine feminine mean to you? How do you perceive her?
That's a very good question. And I think it is very unique. There is not one way or one truth. And what I may feel that the answer for me to that question may be has changed, certainly since I was in my teens to how I am now in my 50s, and will probably change again, because I think it does not, if it stays the same or if it fixates and becomes smaller and smaller and more rigid, I think that is a warning sign that we need to question what's going on there really, because I don't think Goddess is like that. I think she really is this extraordinary presence. So for me, the divine is actually beyond specific gender or even form. And I can't talk about that because it's not in mental language. So the moment I start talking about it, it's not a form. Already I've given it a form. That's not what that is for me. Or it's love, it's the energy of love. But which, yes, she is that, but also it's something else or more, So I love the ancient symbolism of our goddess-loving ancestors. I love going to temple sites and to the ancient places, to museums, because I get such a hit of the symbolic wisdom and way into understanding or experiencing. It's not just mind, experiencing heart, absolute heart connection, which is ecstatic and beautiful and devotional. And how would we want to be not in that? Which is really about a form of non-separation with her. So for me, once my mind gets any kind of grip on that felt, experienced, awesome, expansive something, maybe because I am a woman, what I experience is female, or is what I call goddess, divine feminine. But she is also in the form of the divine masculine, of the gods, of the masculine. And so, and she's not she, she's he. Oh, it's so complicated. Anyway, for me, the imagery of goddess as that which is reached through the portal, through the gateway of dualistic form, is that being not separate from her. And that is really what it is about for me. Goddess is an experience of being not separate from what I call the divine radiance, the divine presence, her love, she who is love, he who is love. And so for me, the imagery of that non-separation is sacred union, which brings in my tantric trainings and the work I've done for a long time in tantric traditions. But again, that is also an image. It's not necessarily it. It's like Buddhism has such a beautiful saying about this. It's the finger pointing to the moon. It's not actually the moon, you know. It's a way in. And then you get to have your own experience with that. So as you're saying, the fingerprints are all different, because how could they not be? So for me, Goddess is everywhere, in everything. So she is around, without, as we say in the Wiccan tradition, and within, because we are a part of her, or there's a part of her within us. And so then, and again, that's not it. That's again just a way of talking about something. And then there is that journey of really walking her path of love, for me, is the expanding of that, so that you become that presence. What would it be like to be so in connection, in such intimacy with Goddess? Not that you are an embodiment of her precisely, because for me that's something more for in ceremony or in service to others. But so that all your actions come from that beingness. So there are practices that we do where you first from the outside in become so filled with her radiance, but then generate the radiance from the inside out, or step into a field of embodiment. I call this the field of love in working with Rhiannon in particular. So yeah, she is constant, and she is change, and she is presence, and she is all forms, and she is in union with her beloved, and she is within me, and she's in the land. She is the land. She is nature, but also she is this otherness, the otherness that holds nature as her beloved in her arms. This is all imagery to talk. She is the best in humanity, the greatest acts of love, the compassion. So this is why I said earlier, humanitarianism is vital for me. This is the bedrock. If your spiritual path is in a division of some sort, where there is a lesser making of others, which is a very human thing to do, we are in that separation. So in my belief, humanitarian has to be equality and compassion. Doesn't mean you have to agree. It doesn't mean you can't have healthy boundaries. What love would do often is to have very healthy boundaries, but they are not destroying the other in the process. And so it's really looking at yourself, the places of your shadow. The work of Rhiannon is very much going into the shadow hunting to bring home those parts and love them home in the heart, so that they no longer have to rule us. So make them conscious, so that we can say, oh look, we give that particular forms and names, and these are parts of her shadow forms, of the archetypes that she's holding the mirror for. So in the working with Rhiannon as goddess of love, as sovereign goddess, as great queen, one of her names, Ricantona, she is the form of the divine feminine I work with a lot, of goddess who I am in devotion to, and she has these different archetypes on her wheel that she is the healthy form of, that we can find in ourselves, and that she then guides you in to look at the shadow forms that so often rule us and that are so uncomfortable to go to. So we work with mythology and fairy tales and different ways so that you can lean into exploring these places, get to know these parts of ourselves, and have tools to have the antidotes to that behavior and thought forms, which you don't always forget, you don't always remember. You forget to take the antidote, right, when you're having something going on and you're trapped in your own
mind
loops. But so that is she is really not something somewhere out there that you go to a tree or to a building and that's where you find her. She is absolutely in everything.
With this year's theme being the sovereign goddess of Avalon, what does sovereignty mean to you, and how does living in Avalon empower you in your sovereignty?
Oh, very good question. Yes, so with the Goddess Conference we work with different forms of goddess, different specific deities, or different archetypal deities, or different archetypes of her each year. And so this year is the sovereign goddesses of Avalon, because there's more than one, like there's more forms of her than one. And for me they are facets of one great jewel. And she's both the light shining through in all these different beautiful colors through the different facets, and the jewel and the facets and the way we experience her in those different forms. So the sovereign goddess is really an ancient Celtic term that has nothing to do with monarchy, and this is really important to get. So I've worked a lot with the queen and king archetypes on the wheel of initiation, the wheel of Rhiannon, because this is one of the forgotten archetypes, and we have an aversion to this archetype because of our history of empire, of colonialization, of monarchy, of ruling classes, of classist systems that are very hierarchical and that are very wounding and damaging, no matter where in that structure you find yourself. They're also very limiting. So it's obvious why there is an aversion to it, and at the same time it's by our patriarchal culture it's held up as something to aspire to, both of which are not the real deal. So we go back to our Celtic ancestry and the proto-Celtic, the pre-Celtic people who had this different relationship. And so if you have goddesses of place, deities of place, who are the land, but who are also the solar cycle, and who are also the cosmos, there is a stellar, usually constellation connection, a solar lunar connection, and then the land. And that land can be, it can be the mountaintop or the high places, or it can be the valleys or the sacred groves or the water sources or the entire landscape. So if sovereign goddess of place is that deity that is all of that, including the people of that land. Because in my understanding of goddess spirituality, goddess in all her forms arises through the human lens of the people who live on the land. That is her, and their relationship there. That's how that particular form is made. Yeah. So sovereign goddess is really about inner sovereignty. If you are in a deep intimacy to the deity of place, you have kinship, this beautiful word that was the absolute foundation, cornerstone of Celtic society. Kinship. You are in kinship to all of that. Her nature, her land, her waters, her animals, her birds, her fishes, her people. That informs the way you act and relate. And it is through that, through a deepening in kinship and intimacy, where for me sacred sexuality comes in, where you are in such a love making, such a devotion, such an embrace with the sovereign goddess of place, that you are therefore able to lead your people. So, or you become the leaders of the different tribal peoples or of the Celtic nations or whatever it was, Celtic lands. And so I think this is a very important piece to find, that the sovereign goddess of Avalon is your connection to the land as sacred, as her, and your connection to you from her that ignites inner sovereignty. So the sovereign one is an inner, very stable and still inner column, if you like, of presence that is not into egoic, selfish goal orientation at all. It's quite a surrendered presence. Yeah, that sovereignty, if you move from that, you can't really be shaken off that. You know, it's really, so imagine if the people in all the lands were reconnecting to that inner sovereignty within themselves. Our power over system would be done like that. That is my true belief. Yeah, You cannot run a power over hierarchical structure with people who are connected to their inner sovereignty as an intimacy with their deity of place that is the sacred land and all her nature, including all beings, all living beings. And our whole way of being with the environment would shift. Our way of being with each other would shift. So this is, of course, a beautiful fantasy of mine, but we are bringing in the conference this intention to have an experience, a lived experience of that here in Avalon, Glastonbury, the heart chakra of the world. I don't know if it's the heart chakra of the world. It's quite a hard place to live. So your second part of your question, how is that here in living reality? I would say for me that's been hard. That is hard. It's challenging. Partly that is because I walk with a goddess who really brings up the shadow stuff within myself to look at, but also the relationships with other people here. This is stirred a lot here in this wonderful town. And also this is a training ground. Of course, you go to the place where it's challenging when you want to learn about inner sovereignty. It's all very easy to do it when everything is hunky-dory. It's much, much harder when things are not. So I think that for me is the answer, the truthful answer to that question, not wanting to color it nicer than it is. But I'm very grateful to be here and to get to practice this here.
Yeah, I hope. Katinka, on behalf of everyone that watches this, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your love, your thoughts, and we can't wait to see you at the conference. Thank you so much.
I can't wait to see you. Please come to the conference and check out my website, which is pathoflovemysteryschool.com.